Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. I'm your host, Paul O'Neid, and today I am joined by Justin Green. Justin is the founder of Assist Financial Planning, and I was actually on his podcast a few weeks ago, and I wanted to have him on because financial planning has been something that's been front of mind for me for the last probably 2.5 months, but for years before that, more so specifically since we moved to the US, we've had to relocate all of our personal finances, learn an entire new system of financial planning and investments. And I think this is a huge blind spot for, entrepreneurs in general, but especially fitness professionals. And Justin's expertise here is unquestionable. So, Justin, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I was really excited when you reached out. We had a fun conversation on my podcast, and I think people enjoyed it a lot. But I kind of left that being like, I didn't know you before then. I just reached out because I'd heard you on a podcast, and I was like, that was a good conversation. So was excited when you reached out, and I'm happy to chat money pretty much anytime. And I think you used a really great word. Blind spot is the key word when we're talking about like the online health and fitness community. It's just, I was going to use that word. So for you to use it, I'm excited to kind of dive into that conversation.
Yeah, and I don't think it niches into just online coaches because I have the pleasure of working with clinicians, gym owners, personal trainers who are actually on the gym floor in person. I think anyone who runs a business, you start off with this enormous passion. And if you're good at what you do, you can make a very good living. The problem is you have lifestyle creep that comes up. You make more money, you spend more money. You have your age and your ability to actually sustain the workload that you did when you were younger. And then you've got different life responsibilities that happen over time, whether it's marriage, having a family, or, God forbid, dealing with an illness. I want to frame this conversation around let's start off by what are some basics of financial planning? What are some things that people should be aware of? And then we can kind of niche into the fitness space.
Yeah, absolutely. So would it be safe to gear this conversation at least around business owners and entrepreneurs,
Oh,
coaches, like in
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
sense? Okay, cool.
Yes.
So one of the very first things is that your business finances are not the same thing as your personal finances. I think that's one of the biggest blind spots that, especially our generation, I think you're similar in age to me, like say
Mhm.
30s and 40s, younger entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, etc. Um, that's a big blind spot because they focus so much attention on their business finances, recurring revenue. Unfortunately, they should probably pay more attention to profitability, but they you pay attention to revenue.
Right.
They pay attention to the marketing, the sales, etc. And the reality is like being good at making money and being good at managing money are two completely different skills. And so I see that mistake happen quite a bit, where individuals in our generation will look online for money advice, and they tend to get attracted to the people who are really good at making money, but those are just good marketers, salespeople. They know that if they stand in front of a Lamborghini, that you'll pay more attention, even if that's like a rented Lamborghini, etc. So, yeah. So, like, very first thing is like making money and managing money, two completely different skills. Business finances, personal finances, both equally important, two completely different things, even if you're like a solopreneur or self-employed individual.
Mhm.
The other very basic thing to focus on is cash flow. And that's one where like you have to do the business cash flow. But then this is where the real blind spot happens is most people then just like don't pay attention to their personal cash flow, which if I'm talking to the fitness community, it's like, okay, come on, this is like tracking macros. Like this is not a hard concept to get across to you guys. But you would be surprised how many people just don't track their cash flow at all. They have no idea what they're spending. They don't have an idea what their recurring fixed expenses are, what their lifestyle actually costs them, or what it would cost them to live the lifestyle they actually want to get to. And so then you can reverse engineer. So cash flow is a very big one. And then the other basic one, because I know we're going to talk taxes at some point, so I'm going to leave that out for now, is investing. So even the ones who I meet who are absolutely crushing it, they're doing everything right in the business. A lot of times they're just stacking cash in a bank account. And at the end of the day, like over a long period of time, that's not going to build wealth for you.
You're going to lose
Um,
money.
yeah, exactly. And so, like, yeah, there's some good high yield saving accounts. So at least you're not like getting 0.01% at a traditional like Bank of America, Chase, etc. You can get closer to like 3 to 5% depending on when the time of the year and the interest rates, etc. But like at the end of the day, you should only have enough in there to cover your emergency fund, which, depends on who you are and your situation, but probably like 6 to 12 months of cash. But anything beyond that, that's not accounted for short-term goals, you have to start looking at investing it. And the problem is that I think most entrepreneurs and business owners, they see the sexy investments, where like the stock market's a pretty non-sexy, like slow and steady way to go,
Hmm.
which is my bias. Like I'll be completely honest, like that's my bias. I have clients who have real estate, etc. I just think as a business owner, people get into real estate thinking it's this passive income, etc. But it's like it's another business. You have to really spend the time and energy to run that real estate business. And then the mistake I've always seen is that then they realize their business that they're really good at running already, their main business starts to go downhill because they've taken the time and energy out of that. So those are some of the basics. To summarize it, it's personal versus business cash flow. Making money and managing money is not the same thing. You need to invest your money for long-term wealth, and cash flow is probably the most important thing when it comes to your finances, especially in your like 30s and 40s.
So I want to come back. Like we'll start on like the difference between business and personal cash flow, which for me was very easy because the corporate structure in Canada is very simple. You either operate as a an LLC that has flow through taxation,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that every dollar you earn minus expenses is taxed, or the corporate structure where you have corporate income and then you pay yourself a salary. So you're taxed twice, essentially. There's no in between. Like there's no LLC, S Corp, C Corp
Sure.
structure. Now, that made it really easy for me when I moved because I was like, oh, well, I've already been separating business expenses from personal expenses, business cash flow, personal cash flow. But I don't think people make that delineation. And what I think it comes down to organization, right? You mentioned tracking macros. Well, tracking macros is a habit. And the same habit that you implement to track macros is the same habit you're going to implement to track your finances. What would you say are some baseline habits that people should get into as they start to generate more and more revenue?
Yeah. So the first one is get a bookkeeping software. So I think a lot of people like to try and just like cut the cost of QuickBooks, which is like $35. And and I'm like, at some point now, granted, once you're just getting started off and running, I get it. A spreadsheet, you shouldn't have that many expenses to track anyways. But just get a software. QuickBooks is like 35 to $50 a month. You should be able to swing that, and that will just pull in all your transactions, and you can categorize it. And the easiest way to do it is you have one business bank account and maybe one business credit card, and everything just runs through there for the business, because it makes it so much easier to just keep it organized, track it, and then save your receipts. I honestly want to like go like get out of the intricacies of like the S corp and LLC and stuff like that, but like on a more
Yeah, no.
basic level of the business cash flow is what I see is that people just mentally don't see it the same way. And so what I mean by that is they will quote unquote invest into something, which is really just them overspending on something. But because it's a business expense, quote unquote, they justify it in their mind as like it's an investment. And so what happens if you don't do that, or if you do that without paying attention to your actual cash flow, you may just be overspending, which then means you have less money to take out of the business. You have less profit to live off of in your personal life. And that's where I like honestly see some of the worst habits in business finances is way less about the actual structure and the intricacies. That's all very important, but it's more the mindset of like, this is my business money, so I need to just go reinvest it, which we can go down that road of what's really a reinvestment into the business. And they will actually just be overspending. And that's a huge problem, because that money ultimately, use the word flows through, will flow through to your personal finances, which then obviously you should have a plan to build wealth with.
Okay. Can you give an example of what would be like a good investment from the business versus a bad investment from the business?
So, you might not agree with me here as a business coach, just so you
Sure.
know. Um, I don't inherently think anything is a good or bad investment, but what I think is that when it comes to business money, people will be less likely to determine what the return is on it and just spend the money anyways, right? So how many coaches do you see out, business coaches, do you see out there that their main spiel is just, I invested in a coach, so you need to invest in a coach and here pay for my $20,000 program up front. And
Oh,
then
100%. Yeah, yeah.
and then the fitness coach, so I'm trying to delineate who we're talking about here, hears that and eventually just buys it, but they never actually stop to say like, what do I need in my business? Like, what skills am I lacking? What services am I lacking? What is it that I need? Is this program providing it? Okay. And then how long should I expect it to take to get the results that I need to recoup this investment? So that's where I think about good and bad investment. It's not inherently like business coaching is good or bad. It's, do you take the time to figure out if this is what you need and it's worth the money? Or do you just spend the money based off hope and emotions and then consider it an investment? Some of the coaches I've talked to, fitness coaches who actually have made really big investments in business coaches that have done it the right way, they almost always say something to me along the lines of how hyper focused they were on recouping the investment. So it was
Yep.
like, I knew I spent 20 grand on this. I knew I needed to make that back in 6 months. And so I was hyper aggressive. And those are always the ones who I feel like tend to get the rewards of investing their business money. But then I've seen so many coaches who are like, I dropped 20 grand, put it on a credit card, which is even worse, or a personal loan.
Hmm.
And then they just never really got anything out of the program because it didn't fit what they actually needed. So that's kind of what I mean by good and bad investment.
Oh, I totally agree. I have this conversation with my mentorship group all the time about return on investment. And it's the most important thing that you need to think about whenever you are spending business money on anything, whether it's a business coach, whether it's marketing. You have to know how much money that you're spending is going to make you. Key point. You spend Okay, let's fucking dial it back here. You know that you charged $300 a month for coaching. You know that your average retention for a client is 10 months. Cool. So your average client spends $3,000 with you. Amazing. If you spend $300 on an ad and that ad nets you one client, then you traded $300 to make 3,000. That's a phenomenal investment and you should do that all day. But if you spend $800 on an ad or $1,000 on an ad to make $3,000, that's not as good of an investment, probably a little bit more risky because you're only making a 3-to-1 return on investment. Do you make that call? I would probably not do that because it's less predictable, but everything else applies.
Ads are
So,
tricky too because I don't get too deep into the running ads and the cost behind ads, and I know that can get really analytical and data driven.
very, yes.
But like sometimes when you see the marketing for ads, it's like if you could give me $1 and I could give you back $3, why wouldn't you do it, right? Like they're trying to play on your emotions of that. And sometimes I have to stop and be like, okay, well, hold on, because you need to make sure that dollar you're paying and that $3, quote unquote, you're getting back. Like, what's the cost for you to fulfill your service? Like, what's the profit you get off fulfilling your
Yep.
service, right? So you have to dive in a little bit deeper. Where I do think some people get pitched on ads. Actually, I had Ashley Schwartz was one of the last interviews I did on the Dollars and Dumbbells podcast, and she talked about how she's on like her fourth ad person. The first three were like atrocious, and the fourth one is actually it's working out for her. But like that's where I think you have to be careful with the ads investment, is because it's very easy to manipulate that marketing message of like, if you give me $1, I give you $3. It's like, but is that $3 revenue and then it actually is only 50 cents profit? You know what I mean? Like
Well,
that gets
and
a little tricky.
using the example I just gave, if you charge $300 a month and you know you're going to make $3,000 off a client, you spend 300 to make 3,000, you recoup your investment cost after 1 month. If you're paying
If you're
$1,000,
if wait,
if you're
hold
good.
on. I was gonna say if you're profitable too,
Right.
because
Right.
if you start to think about coaches who have assistant coaches under them. You actually, I was listening to your podcast coming up on, preparing for this, and you were talking to, I think the guy at Kodiak Barbell, I think his name
Stuart,
was,
yep,
and you mentioned a scenario where you knew a coach who did $1 million in revenue, but $90,000 in profit.
yeah,
I think you mentioned,
yep.
and it's like if you're that case, so $300 of revenue is not $300 of profit. So it's actually like that's where I just want to point out is like that's kind of what the example I'm making is like you have to be careful because you actually need to measure it based on the profit you're getting per client and not the revenue.
Even better argument. So you spend $300 to make 3,000 potentially. If you're only profiting, let's say $200 a month, you're underwater for a month and a half. Whereas if you're paying out $1,000 like cost of acquisition to make 3,000, you're underwater for probably 6 months,
Yeah.
maybe more. And so the time to recoup the investment is important. There's two key things that I do. I do a lot of things very differently than most business coaches, but number one, I don't allow anyone to pay for my service on a credit card who can't immediately cover the cost.
Yeah.
So unless you have the cash, I don't take you on as a client because I don't
Smart.
want you taking a loan. Number two, I know that based on the metrics that I've collected over the years of mentorship, if I can teach you to raise your prices, keep your clients longer, work more efficiently, and carry more clients, if you sign 5 clients during the mentorship program, which is 3 months long, you've paid for my services already. That's why I priced it the way that I do. So I guarantee you your return on investment. That's not something that most young coaches are thinking about. They're thinking about, I need more bodies in the door. I need to spend on ads, or I need to get in an editor. I need to do this. Even if you're hiring a video editor, if you're paying that person, let's say $20 per video that you're going to post on Instagram, and it takes you 10 videos to sign a client, your cost of acquisition is $200. How long is it going to take you to make that $200 back? Right. So I think return on investment is a very important concept to understand and embrace if you want to build wealth, because your profitability is the only thing that matters. That guy who's making 90K on $1 million net profit, I would blow my fucking brains out.
Yeah, that's a lot of work for like when you could just get less clients and probably have maybe like 120,000 in revenue and do it all yourself and 90,000. Now, you'll hear the argument, and I was trying to there's two ways I want to go with this. I actually kind of wanted to talk about that. I don't want to hammer this too hard, but the example with the ad that you were saying too is like, so using the $1,000 acquisition, I think too, the other argument there is like mentally, you're not serving that client as well because you're in the red, right? So you have to go
Yep.
get more clients. And then so is your retention rate going to stay as high as it was? It might go
Agree.
down, right?
Yeah, I
So
totally agree.
yeah, that's like a hamster wheel too. And we don't really need to get into that too
No,
much.
no, no. But it's important to highlight for people because I think profitability and cash flow are linked. And I think people look at cash flow as how much money I'm making. Cash flow is how much money you're keeping.
hmm Yeah. Yeah,
Totally
yeah. And
different.
that's the whole managing, right? So making money versus managing. Managing is how much you're keeping. Once you get later into the business, like once you're actually making money. So early in the business, your most valuable resource that you have available to you is most likely time,
Yes.
because unless you have like you're coming from a corporate background and you have a big runway, like most likely you're launching with you're bootstrapping it, right? So you got a lot of time, so you need to invest the time, whether that's editing your own videos or whatever it is, watching YouTube videos to get better, learn marketing, sales, etc. Now eventually that pendulum will swing, right, where like once you're really good at business, you're making more money, your time's getting like more scarce, then it becomes it's easy to just think about like, okay, if I can hire an editor for $20 per video, but it's going to take me an hour and I can make on average, $150, $300 an hour. This is the whole like Dan Martell buy back your time concept. Then
Great
that
book.
starts to make sense. But the dangerous part about that argument is when your time is not actually worth what you think it is. And early on in the business,
Yeah.
you can tell me your time's worth $300 an hour, but the reality is nobody's actually paying you that, and you're not full with clients. So reality is your time's not worth $300 an hour. And so that's the danger, is when you start treating your time as more valuable than the market, actually values it, right? Because value is determined by other people. It's not. That's the hardest part. Is like so many or business gurus, not just coaches, will go on and you need to charge more and your time is worth more. Da, da, da. And it's like I don't necessarily disagree, but also like yourself, you don't really determine that. It's what people are willing to pay you in the market, and the supply and demand is going to determine what you're worth. And I've heard you talk about this a lot of times, right? Like build up the client roster and then charge more as you get up there, right? Because that's supply and demand, right? You have less supply to give. And so if you have the demand, you can charge more, blah, 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 blah. Some people try and do it too early, whether it's, with clients or they value their time more than it's actually worth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, here's a little PSA for some of you younger coaches. You motherfuckers are charging way too much. You're you're not worth what you're trying to charge. And that is not meant to denigrate you in any way. You haven't earned the right to charge what you charge. You don't have the evidence, you don't have the expertise, you don't have the history of results. Um, so build it. Plain and simple, just build it, put in your time. Uh, that all to say, like, how early should someone be starting to think about financial planning?
I mean, out the womb. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, once you're an adult and you're off on your own, and so I mean, early 20s, you should really at least be thinking about this stuff. Now, granted, you're probably trying to figure out the income side of thing, whether you're launching a business or you're an employee or whatever. Like you're kind of getting your feet under you, you're starting to make money. But it's a good, as early as possible. Time is in your favor if you can start as soon as possible with thinking about what you want your ideal life to look like. What's the vision? And then figuring out what are the financial habits you're going to need in place to do that. So, whether that's saving up for your emergency fund, maybe that's getting out of debt that you're already in, maybe that's investing for the future, preparing for children. Like in your 30s and 40s, there's so many things
Oh yeah.
competing for your money, right? Like there's just so much going on. So the sooner you can think about it and have a plan in place, that's honestly one of the most important things. Is most people don't have any plan in place at all. They're just
Mhm.
kind of winging it, and as long as they're not going negative in their bank account, it's cool. They're good for another month, and they just keep doing that. But if you do that for too long, you get too many years down the road. You're in your 40s, you're in your 50s, and you've never really stopped to think about like what the future looks like and what you're going to need for the future. It almost becomes too late, because if you start saving early in your 20s and 30s, that money can, if it's invested right, can compound significantly, at like 7 to 8% over time. That's a significant amount. There's so many charts out there that shows that, like, if you start, I'm going to make up numbers, don't run
Yeah.
these numbers, I'm making up numbers off the top of my head, but like let's say you saved $1,000 a month from 20 to 30, and you invested it and you stopped investing at 30, at age 65 you'd have $3 million. Completely made up numbers, just think about the example. For someone who doesn't start until they're 30, they'd have to like save from 30 to say 65, $1,000 a month, and they still end up with less than that first example, right? I don't know if those numbers actually work, but the point of the example is that you can start earlier and then stop and let the money do its work for you, compared to the later you start, you have to work really hard because you don't have time compounding for you.
Mhm.
And so that's why I say, like, as early as possible, you can start thinking about this. Because if in your 20s you put $50 a week aside or $50 a month aside, that's gonna be way better than if you don't start doing anything until your 40s and you can put $500 a month aside. It's like, yeah, but you're just late to the game.
You mentioned something that I think is worth diving into. Most of the people, especially these days, if you've gone through formal education, maybe advanced education, like a master's degree, or I had two. I started my career as a collegiate strength coach. I was making $53,000 and I had $150,000 in debt.
Hmm.
What do you say to that person? Like, is the priority to pay down the debt or is the priority to start saving?
In that specific situation, um, I mean, ideally, all right, let's go. Ideally, if you can do both, that's great, right? If you can do a little bit, You have to look at the interest rates. Now, often with student loans, interest rates are lower, sub 5%, but it really depends on the situation. But if you're looking at that, you can do the rate arbitrage, right? You're paying off a 5% loan. Hopefully you're getting about 8%, annually compounded in the market. So, you're kind of making out in the long run. But then you have to really go mentally of like the burden of carrying the student loan, the cash flow burden, because X amount a month each month is going straight to the student loan. So it's not A or B answer, to be honest with you. Like, you ideally would be able to chip away at both, but some people will go the more like Dave Ramsey route of let's just eliminate this debt as soon as possible. And I think there's a lot of really good mental benefits of that, even if the
That's what I did.
spreadsheet, if the spreadsheet doesn't say numbers wise this is the best decision for you. I think there's a lot of mental and psychological advantages, and a lot of money really comes down to that, because most people aren't looking at their money in a spreadsheet, right? Like, that's what people like I do, but for the most part, like, most people aren't looking at it that way, right? It's what makes them feel safe and comfortable and confident and secure. And so eliminating the debt might be what makes you feel most secure. And honestly, the education system's kind of broken. So, I mean, I think that has to break even more at some point for this to go away. But in the meantime, I tend to have, so there's a lot of advisors who do student loan planning. I don't do a lot of that because my opinion is kind of like, you took the debt out, you should probably pay it back. Now there's like the higher debt levels, physicians, et cetera, where it's like they know when they do this, they're kind of playing the student loan planning game because they're taking on like 500K of student loan debt. But for most people, especially if you're a high earner and you've got a moderate balance, you're probably outside of all those plans anyways. You just got to put a plan in place to pay it off as soon as reasonably possible.
Yeah, one of the books that I read recently, within the last, I think I read it about 6 months ago, was called The Psychology of Money by Morgan
Oh,
Housel.
yeah, great book.
Oh,
Fantastic book.
that book
Morgan's a
was,
huge, like, I was trying to think of an example, maybe in your world, that would be like a really well-known coach that everyone knows. Like, that's Morgan for advisors. And then he's always been great at writing blogs. And then he wrote this Psychology of Money book that, like, I don't think he expected to take off, and it just went mainstream, right? I think he thought it would be a book that most advisors read, but like, it just went freaking bananas. And so Morgan's great. That's a great book.
it was really phenomenal. And you spoke about the psychology of like paying off debt. For me, oh, there you go. For me, paying off that debt was like every month after I was debt free was like, oh my God, look at all this money I have. The problem that I ran into was my predisposition is I'm really good at making money, but I'm even better at spending it.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty common.
So putting myself in front of a financial planner when I was back home really put me in a phenomenal position. And now that we've moved, actually, one of our main investments was the home that we were living in. We owned it. We sold our home. So we were able to bring over a lot of cash with us. But the most important thing for us right now is how do we use that cash to set us up for the future? And it is so, like, I'm speaking from experience because I've done this. Like, it is so easy to look at your bank account and go, oh man, I made more money than I've ever made in my life. I'm going to go buy a sick truck. How do you, how do you curb that behavior or give advice to people on how to avoid those mistakes?
Yeah, honestly, it's pretty easy, right? Like, if you have a plan in place that accounts for spending money and for saving money, then you kind of know what's within the boundaries of doing, right? It's no different than a diet plan, a macro plan. Think for like an average individual. I'm not talking like bodybuilder who like can't eat
Right.
anything other than, rice and chicken. But like, think of the average person who's like 80% on all the time, and then 20% they're just eating whatever the hell they want. Like, that's kind of me. Um, that's the same way with your cash flow, right? So a very general rule of thumb, and I just posted about this recently, is the 50-30-20 rule.
Okay.
And that means 50% goes to like your living expenses. This is after tax. 30% would go to your wants. So this is like dining out, spending money on, cars. And cars can get a little tricky. Like, you can technically put that in the living expenses, but like, if you're talking about splurging on a luxury car, like, I would probably put some of that into the wants. But anyway, so this is like travel, dining out, entertainment, stuff like that. And then 20% savings. And early on, if you have a lot of debt, I'll actually like your debt payments, I'll include in the savings. I think that I just kind of consider the 20% setting yourself up for your future, right? Now, this is just a general rule of thumb where you start. Everyone's different, right? So if you live in a high cost of living area, your 50% might actually be 55, which means you have to spend a little bit less on your wants. And, or if you have extremely aggressive savings goals, maybe your 20% savings is actually 30%. So, you start at the 50, 30, 20, then you customize based on everyone's needs, right? But if you're someone who's making a lot of money and you have intentional spending plan in place where like, cool, at the beginning of the month I automate my savings goal, right? That's another huge thing that'll help you is like
Oh, yeah.
upfront at the beginning of the month, put the money wherever it is you're saving, whether it's in the bank or your investment accounts, your solo 401ks, your 401ks through work, whatever it is. That's the advantage of employees is like the money goes right to their 401k before they even get paid, whereas like self-employed individuals have to really set up that thing for themselves, that transfer.
Oh, dude, automating savings so the money never goes to your account is the
Yeah,
cheat code to fixing your habits.
100%.
100%.
Yeah, systems are huge in every aspect of life. Finances are not excluded from that, right? So if you can systematize it and put it on autopilot as much as possible, and then you look at like, okay, what does it cost you to live? So your mortgage or your rent, your cars, your utilities, your groceries, children's activities if you got kids, stuff like that, right? You look at that, you know what that's going to be every month ballpark. Well, then you know how much you have to spend. So, okay, do you have the freedom to buy a truck? Maybe, but everything else is already kind of taken care of. So at least you've got a framework and a like boundary set mentally. Because the problem is most people don't do any of that and they just look at their bank account and say, I've got X amount here. And when we're talking to business owners, the other problem is they haven't actually put money aside for taxes. So
I was
what
just
they
gonna
look at,
say that they
yeah,
look at
they
their
look at
money and
their
they're like,
bank
"Oh man, I
account.
have so much." You're like, "Well, in
So
Canada, 50% of that's the government's, buddy."
yeah, so when you're looking at a business owner, the first thing they need to do is actually put 30% of their profit aside for taxes, and then what's left after that is the 50, 30, 20. You know what I mean? Like this is not before you put your taxes aside. This is after.
After,
So
yeah.
that's the first thing you really need to do. But then when you're looking at that personal spending, but then that still leaves you, let's say you're doing 10K after taxes, right? At 30%, that's still $3,000 a month you can go spend on whatever the hell you want. To some people, that's a lot. Some people, it's not. If that's not, then you need to go make more money, like plain and simple. It's a zero sum game, and that's the problem is most people like to think, and that's definitely not a word, ambitiously about what they can make someday or what some marketing guru on Instagram says they're worth someday. And the reality is you're not worth that yet, so don't spend like that. When you are that worth that much or you're making that much, sure, go spend however you want that way. But until then, if you're making 10 grand, you can't be spending 10 grand on your wants, if that makes sense.
I think it makes perfect sense. So talk
Get
to
me
me a little
fired
bit.
up.
You I know, you mentioned, a few times this 8% market return. Um,
Statistically, that's what the US stock market, the S&P 500 index
yep.
has done over the long term annually. So I ask your question. Sorry.
So I was going to like thank you for clarifying that, but I've been always of the mind I don't like volatility personally in my money. I don't like seeing my money go up and down. So especially recently there's been a lot of talk about like, oh yeah, I'm doing some day trading or I'm doing forex or whatever or Bitcoin or crypto, and I'm like, man, I just want to set it and forget it.
Yes.
Where do you fall within this? Like, and I know it's going to be individual based on each person's risk tolerance, of course, and like
Yep.
when you want to pull the money out versus how long you want to keep the money in. How do you kind of advise people with that? Is it a percentage goes to volatility, a percentage goes to stable investments? How do you do it?
Yeah. So great question. You and I would get along very well because we have very similar ideas on this. The only time I'm recommending any of that extra stuff, the high risk, high volatility, is if somebody has an interest in it. And then I'm looking at, okay, how much can you actually afford to play with this? And when we do this plan, we're going to assume this is all going to go to zero, right? And if it goes to zero, will it blow up your plan? No, okay, cool, you can afford this. So then it's all upside, right? I, I
Yeah.
am I am not my bias and my expertise is the stock market, right? And I'm looking at globally diversified, so US and international. So, a lot of projections will use that 8% because that is what like the US stock market has done. But I'm actually building in global diversification. It's going to lean heavier towards the US, but that's worked out really well lately with the US being so volatile for last year. But to kind of highlight that 8% is a long term average, right? That doesn't mean every year is going to be 8%. That means you have to ride with it when it's down 20% or when it's up 20%. You got to just chill and stay invested for the long term. And this is a long term play. If you need the money in 90 days, a year, you shouldn't be invested at all. So, the rule of thumb is if you have a short term goal, I would say under 5 years, some people will say under 3 years, that money should not be invested. It should be in very safe liquid, which just means like you can go withdraw it at any time. That's what liquidity means. Funds, which is most likely just going to be like a high yield savings account, earning 3 to 4%. The whole point is you don't want to earn. You're not looking to earn a whole lot. You're just looking that the money is there and not down when you need it.
Yeah.
Biggest example would be a down payment for a house, right? Like if you got $100,000 in the bank, you're trying to buy a house in the next year or two. Buying a house is like when it's there, you need that money now, right? Like, something pops up on Zillow and you find a way to get it because it's so hard to get houses now. You need that money. You don't want it to be in the stock market. You don't want the market to be down 20% that week. And so that's the rule of thumb is anything for less than like 5 years should just be in cash, like not invested. Anything for a longer term goal, 5+ years, I'm looking at investing it in a low cost index funds, globally diversified through the US and international stock market. Now, anyone who wants to get more aggressive, I'm looking at that on an individual basis, but that's not like a default that I'm like, we need a little bit of this, we need a little bit of that. Because it is very volatile, it is very risky, very aggressive, and it's also very complex, right? And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of data on the stock market averages and historic performance. There's not a lot of data on Bitcoin. I mean, Jesus, they can't even tell me who started Bitcoin. It's just this like mythological creature who created a white paper back in like 2000s, Hitachi or something like that. It's just for me, I don't fully understand it, and so I know a lot of people who have crushed it, but timing and luck has also been on their side with
Yeah.
Bitcoin. And most of the time, people who have no interest in Bitcoin are starting to ask about it when it's all over the news. And you know what that means? That means it's at an all time high.
Mhm.
Buying at an all time high is the worst time to buy something. So if you're not buying Bitcoin when it's bottomed out, you probably shouldn't be thinking about it when it's at an all-time high. So, that applies to GameStop. That was crazy. Like, I don't know. I
Mhm.
guess that was like 4 or 5 years ago now. That was like COVID. It seems like it was just
That was
yesterday,
a
but
documentary, actually.
yeah. And so that it popped off recently too because that guy like tweeted out of nowhere. I don't know if you heard about that
Really?
a couple months ago. Yeah, he like tweeted or he posted just like a meme, didn't say anything, and then like everyone went nuts thinking like, oh, it's coming back. So anyway, like stuff like that that's hyped just by media, that's a short term play. Day trading is I don't really think we need to go too much into day trading. That's not
Well,
investing in my terms. That is gambling.
okay, so that's exactly the point that I was going to make. So when I personally look at our finances, you mentioned down payment on a house. So a short-term goal for Olivia and I was we want to put a down payment on a house. And like I said, we sold our house in Canada, so we're coming over with a bunch of cash. Our financial planner, his advice is like, don't touch it. We'll put it in a high yield savings account. You can get to it in a year. You'll have made 3 to 4%. Fantastic. No issues. We need to look at the other investments that you're going to be making on a month to month basis now and building wealth for the future. And so I look at that as like, okay, how much liquidity do I need to feel comfortable? Meaning, how much money do I need available to me, snap on my fingers right now? You mentioned 6 to 12 months, which for so many people during COVID, if they had that, they would have been fine.
They would have been great because the best time to have cash on hand is during a recession or a down period, or right? Because you can take advantage of opportunities that most people
Yep.
can't, right? And so a lot of businesses started during the '08 recession. A lot of businesses started during COVID that did well because they just had cash available to deploy for opportunities that a lot of people couldn't take advantage of because they just, they were either rightfully so frightened at the beginning, or they just didn't have the cash on hand to make it through the bumpy time.
Yeah. And then so we've got our stable investments, which for me is planning for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I look at volatile investments like day trading or crypto, to me, use the perfect word. It's gambling. When I go to Vegas and I say I have $1,000 to gamble with, that's me saying I'm okay with walking away with $0.
Exactly.
Right? You only gamble with money you're okay to lose. And I
Exactly.
said 1,000. I don't gamble because I don't like losing money. But
I'm
and
the same way.
that's
I'm
another
the same
reason
way.
why I don't invest in cryptos because I don't want to gamble with my money.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm ever in a position where I'm like, I got $10,000 and maybe I'll take a look at it. But I also don't want to. I don't want to manage my money, which is why I hire a professional to do it for me.
Yeah.
And so if I'm hiring a professional to do it for me, I trust them to do the best thing for me with my money. And I think that like just that philosophy has led us to be in the position that we are. We're debt free. We have a full down payment for a house already that we are planning on buying as soon as we have credit in the US. Like we're in a very fortunate financial position that a lot of people are not in. These are not things that I would have thought about. Like I'm 37. These are not things that I was thinking about when I was 25. But if I was, I would have been so much further ahead. So I'm hoping that like as people are listening to this conversation, they're kind of that light bulb in their mind goes off of like, I probably shouldn't be spending as much money as I am. And okay, I'll put up, I'll ask you this. I fucking hate budgeting. I used the word budget with my wife yesterday. I
Yeah.
thought
And
she
all
was
your
gonna.
clients hate to track their macros.
Okay, but here's the thing. Budgeting to me means knowing where my money's going. It doesn't mean restricting my spending.
100%.
When I said the word budget to Olivia, I thought she was going to rip my fucking eyes out of my face.
Yeah. Welcome to my marriage.
how do you how do you look at it like ultimately talk to me about financial freedom.
Sure. Yeah.
What is
Joking
financial
aside,
freedom? Yeah.
joking aside, the budgeting stigma, for lack of a better word, the connotation around budgeting is super negative, right? It's restrictive. It's
Yeah.
tracking every Starbucks purchase you had every all month, like stuff like that, right? And a lot of that comes from old school finance gurus such as like Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, etc. Right? Um, it doesn't have to be like that. I called it intentional spending plan earlier, where like you're giving yourself the freedom to spend 30% on whatever the hell you want because you've been disciplined enough to save 20%, right? So freedom kind of financial freedom for me is, and especially if you're talking to that like 25-year-old that you wanted to talk to, it's less about, okay, I'm gonna, save all my money for the next 40 years and then retire at 65, right?
Yeah, that's not the dream
I have a
anymore.
very different perspective as a financial advisor because of my life experiences. I lost my mom when she was 40 when I was in college. I lost my cousin, who was a very close mentor to me in his early 40s as well. He had served 20 years as a Black Hawk pilot in the Army,
Oh, wow.
finally retired. Like, dude had sacrificed, everything, divorced, kids relationships, etc., for serving our country. Finally excited to be a quote unquote normal civilian. Within 6 months, unfortunately, he had like a rare brain condition that was never diagnosed. Like, he
Oh
was
my
gone.
goodness.
Yeah. So like I have a very different perspective, right? I'm not going to just save all my money and not enjoy life at all for the next 45 years. I
No,
don't know if
fuck
I'm going to
that.
be here. You said this before we started recording, like if I'm alive at 70, great. Like that's awesome.
I was joking. I
So
plan to live a lot longer. I just want to put that out there.
yeah, so but like you plan to, but you have no idea,
No,
right?
no
Because
idea.
like these things are outside of our control. And so for me, it's about a balancing act of which entrepreneurs tend to not be good at. We're all in on things of like, I want to live life today. That doesn't mean it has to be, reckless and YOLO, you only live once type of lifestyle, but I want to live an okay, decent life today. I don't want to sacrifice everything. but also like I do want to save for the future and know like, okay, if I do make it to 65, I'm probably not going to want to be sitting at my computer for 40, 50 hours a week. And I'm probably going to have grandchildren, et cetera, that I want to go spend time with or travel or whatever it might be. And so for me, that's where I kind of think about balancing it. I would probably be okay working late into my 70s with my current profession, but I don't know. So I want the flexibility and freedom to do whatever the hell I want,
To choose.
whether it's at age 50, age 70, whatever it is. And so that's the way I look at it. Compared to like before I launched my own firm, I worked with straight up retirees and like retirement planning, and a lot of them were just, they retired and you're just helping them figure out how much they can spend each year and like kind of go on. Like that for me isn't really how I view it. And so that's why I like working with the younger generation to help them kind of frame that mindset of let's plan to build wealth for future flexibility and freedom. But like that doesn't mean you have to hate your life for the next 40 years because you're not
Mhm.
spending anything and you're pinching pennies. Now, granted, some people don't make enough money where like maybe just the goal has to be make more money
Yep.
before you can spend a little bit more money, and I understand that because I come from those type of beginnings. But yeah, at
Same.
the end of the day, freedom is just it's really more about flexibility to me,
Okay.
and being able to cover your living costs if you need to with the wealth that you've built, whether that's cash, stock investments, whether it's tapping into the home equity of your primary home at some point. Like I don't personally view your personal residence as an investment just because statistically the numbers show that the cost to maintain your personal residence and the amount that it goes up over time tends to actually balance out pretty low percentage wise. Now, you probably made a killing, and anyone else probably around this time selling has made a killing because the market has gone nutty over the last couple of years. So I'm not saying it can't be, but the other thing is most people don't sell their homes. And so
Mm.
if you're not going to sell your home, it's kind of hard to tap into the liquidity of your home. And so that's the other reason that it's like I try not to advise people to like don't just view your home as an investment. It's got to go beyond that because at the end of the day, when you're, in your 60s and you're looking to retire, if all you have is like, oh, I got a paid off home, it's like technically you could do a reverse mortgage, but do you want to? That type of thing, right? So you need to go beyond your home as a quote unquote investment.
Well, you also have to live somewhere. So, and
Correct.
what you're going to end
Well,
up
you have to run
doing?
the numbers because there's a lot of high cost cities. Like, for example, where I am, I'm in Massachusetts right now. I actually rent, I don't own. One, because I don't think we're going to stay here for long term. And so there's a lot of short term cost if you own a home for a couple of years and then sell. It's usually
Mhm.
not worth it because you're paying mostly interest. You're going to pay the fees to buy, sell, and then you're hoping the market didn't take a turn, right? So you do have to actually run the numbers. There's a lot of cities where the numbers make sense to actually rent, especially if you're younger, no family type of like that situation. Now, where like you are, I think you're in South Carolina now.
North,
Just oh,
North
you're in
Carolina.
North. I thought
Yeah,
you were going
Charlotte.
to. Yeah, I thought you said you were actually
We
below the
plan.
border.
Yeah, we planned on it, but
Gotcha,
unfortunately, the availability of rentals was pretty low where we wanted to
gotcha.
move. So,
Right. So like that area though, like I know the Charlotte market pretty well. Not like super well, but like we lived in Raleigh for a little bit. You can buy good homes there for decent prices and for our generation. But
oh
if you
my
looked around
God,
where I am right now, you could get a shack for about 600,000. It's like, I'm just gonna
man,
wait.
our home. So we were living in a 3-bedroom townhouse about 20 minutes outside of downtown Ottawa. We sold for 650 for a 3-bedroom townhome for 650 here in our little area. Uh, I
Amazing
could
house.
I could get a 3-car garage, a pool, and like a 3,000 plus square foot home with a backyard.
We were renting in Raleigh, and I had a 3-bedroom townhome with a 2-car garage, beautiful place. It was less than 2 grand a month to rent that. We came back here for family, and my father in law was having health issues. I'm about 50 minutes outside of Boston, so I'm really not that close to the city. I'm like pretty far out, and the first apartment we moved into after moving, this about 2 years ago, was almost $3,000 for a 2-bedroom small apartment that was like half the size of that
Yeah,
place. And we were just looking at each other like, what are
it's
we doing back
crazy.
here? So where you live does matter, right?
Yeah.
So, you are going to have to spend something on living, but I do think it's important. I do think one of the big mistakes, and this wasn't really part of what we were talking about, but I think a big mistake is that some people do rush into home ownership, not understanding the cost of it and like the idea that you should be in that home for probably at least 5 to 7 years. If it can work out, like there's definitely like outliers, but for the most part, ideally, if you're going to buy, you should plan to be there for 5 to 7 years before selling.
Yeah, I agree. Um, the last part of our conversation here is I was very lucky early on in my career to have a mentor ask me a really important question. And this is while I was still working collegiate strength and conditioning, but the same principle applies. He asked me, he said, "Paul, I want you to name me 5 strength coaches who retired as strength coaches." I could not name a single one because every person who I knew who retired, I'm talking like legends of the industry, had either all gone into administration, so like the associate athletic director, or had left strength and conditioning to pursue another opportunity, or had supplemental income or revenue streams from speaking engagements, books, products, services. Now, if you go into the personal training realm, you have guys like Joe DeFranco, Eric Cressy, um, even some of the guys who are a little bit lesser known. They're all going to be able to retire, but they're not retiring off of their coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I work on with my business coaching clients is diversifying revenue streams and creating signature products or signature products or services that do not require your time to fulfill, and then using that money to invest in the future, or working with someone like you who can help them plan for the future. Because I personally, I don't know of a single online coach who's been able to retire off of the revenue exclusively built through their online coaching. It's through investments or other businesses that they started with that money.
Yeah. So, what's the question?
So
Because I have
what
thoughts,
is
but I want to make sure I'm addressing the
no,
question.
just hit me with your thoughts.
Yeah,
Like that concept.
for sure. So, one of I don't have a lot of thoughts on the passive, like creating signature product passive, because that's more marketing
No,
and
no, no.
sales, and
Yeah.
that's not my thing. Although, like, if you can do that right, that's awesome. I just think most people aren't actually able to pull it off, right?
Right.
Um, it's harder done than said, is the way I would put that. But the reality is that continuing to make more revenue in your business doesn't actually build wealth. And so you have to do kind of the route you said of like investing outside of it. And that could be in other businesses, that could be in other ventures. The easiest, like laziest way, to be completely honest, is the stock market, because it's long term predictable. It's not guaranteed by any means, but like over long term, like there's a lot of data to show it's pretty predictable of what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of set it and forget it. So you can keep all your attention and focus on running your business, increasing your revenue and profitability, et cetera, and just put a little bit aside into this like machine. Mel Abraham, I don't know if you know him. He calls it kind of like the money machine is the business, the wealth machine is like the portfolio. So where you're investing outside of the business
Well, to elaborate on that too, as your business revenue goes up and your personal revenue goes up, that 20% that you've allocated for
is more
savings
money.
also going up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Which, by the way, is the reason why we use percentages, right? And to your point, you mentioned lifestyle creep like right at the beginning of the podcast, which
Mm-hmm.
essentially, for anyone listening who doesn't know what that means, it means like as you make more money, you spend more money, sometimes at a higher rate than what you're making. It's just natural. And so, if you're saving a percentage of money, well, you're taking more money off the plate right away. You're actually kind of eliminating the ability to have lifestyle creep exponentially, but you're having a good amount of lifestyle creep because your 30% that's going towards your
Yeah.
wants, your
Yeah.
fun stuff is going up as well, right? So you're having a good level. of lifestyle creep, but not too much. And so that's why percentages are super important. But back to your kind of original point, this is where the making money and managing money is it's two different things, right? And the making money is like how you treat your business and how do you get the most juice out of that to then put into this wealth machine that Mel Abraham calls it. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to either fuel your retirement, your pivot, your maybe your new business venture later on. Like that's the money that you're gonna need to rely on someday, whether it's because you wanted to leave coaching, whether it's because you were forced to for medical reasons or family reasons. Like I think having the ability as a younger coach to just know that your life is going to change probably 100, 200, 300 times between now and 60 years old. Like your desires are going to change, your vision's going to change, your family's going to change. I mean, you could have children, you could get divorced, you can move, etc. Like just having that flexibility of building wealth outside the business is going to be huge, because that's how, like, to your point, you said like, okay, people either have these recurring passive revenues or they have, this financial planner who's helped them build wealth. It's like that's how most people retire, is by building wealth. It's just usually through their employer 401k plan, etc. So like that's you're when you go out to start a business, usually you're starting a job truthfully early on. um,
Yep.
and so in that stage, you then have to just create your own workplace retirement plan, which is there's a lot of options to do. There's a lot of self-employment retirement accounts that are huge. And actually to go on that real quick, some of those accounts have the best tax advantages that are significantly better than all the bullshit you see on social media about how to pay $0 in taxes, which kudos to you. We've gone almost an hour and haven't talked about like how to pay $0 in taxes, because that's almost always what people want to ask me about. And I'm like, that's the wrong goal. Like you're thinking about the wrong thing. And I think that's what so many people get focused on with finances in the business world is like, fuck the government. How do I just pay no money in taxes and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, cool. You want to know how you pay $0 in taxes?
Make no
Do you know
money.
the answer? Exactly. Make no money, have no profit. And then when you go to buy your house, good luck, because you just told the bank you make no money. Right. And so I appreciate having this whole conversation around actually managing money and not just like the wrong goal of how do I just pay no taxes?
I agree with you. It's the wrong goal. And I mean, if you manage your finances appropriately, you will take advantage of, let's say, 90% of tax advantages. Probably a higher percentage than that.
And most tax advantages, to be clear, are deferring. Like you're deferring taxes to later on in life.
Which will
Um,
fuck you hardcore because I'm
maybe,
dealing with that right now.
maybe depends. What do you mean? Like what's like without
I deferred.
divulging too much?
I deferred a lot of dividends early on in the business. So now, so in Canada they're called dividends. Here they're called distributions. So
Okay.
I deferred taxes on a lot of distributions early on in the business. So as we're looking to close our Canadian business, I'm having to be
Uh,
taxed retroactively on those distributions. But
yeah. So it
again,
doesn't really work that way here, because here it's like you're going to pay taxes on that money the year you earn that money. So
yeah. So
whether you
you,
take it out of the bank or not, which is a common confusion for most people, is like doesn't matter if you take the money out of the bank, especially as like a non-corporate, because most coaches are not going to be a C
yeah,
corp,
no,
right?
they're going to be LLC.
As long as as long as you made the money that year, you're going to most likely pay taxes on it. It does not matter if you take the money out of the business or not.
Okay.
So that might
So
be a little bit different. I don't know anything about the Canadian structure. Um,
there's some small nuances, but like basically why I'm bringing that up is I want the listeners to understand I've made these mistakes and I made them before I spoke to people like you. And now that I have spoken to people like you, I don't make those mistakes. And that's why we're in the fortunate position that we're in.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's just like a coaching relationship. It's probably not as high touch. Like I don't know your relationship with your planner, but
No, we talk about
it's very
guns a lot.
similar. What's that?
We talk about guns a lot.
um, honestly, that's a lot of like a lot of it's a relationship business, right? So a lot of it is like much more than money. Once you get beyond that like initial planning stage, so that doesn't surprise me. I talk about fitness or sports a lot with my clients, but it's very similar in the sense of like you get a plan in place. Now a fitness plan is much more aggressive and like you have to do things weekly and daily to follow it. Like finance is more like monthly and quarterly, so it's less touch. But like you get a plan in place, you have someone to reach out to when you have questions, right? And so you can probably always ping him, I'm assuming, uh, and then you review and you adapt based on life changes when needed. And so it's a very similar concept. It's just I think it's a bigger picture. It's a longer like vision, like you're spanning it out, looking at a longer time frame than maybe like a 12-month fitness journey, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, I'm glad that you found someone that's helped you out, and I think it's super important. But I think a lot of people, especially younger people, think they can just kind of wing it and DIY it, and I'm not saying you're not smart enough because most people are smart enough, and a lot of it is basics, just like fitness, right? Like if you followed the basics, you'd be in a really really good position. Um, but being able to follow the basics and ignore the noise is actually really hard to do without someone in your corner that you trust that can be like, hey, just like don't listen to that bullshit. It's fake. That's like half of my job nowadays. It's just like, hey, I saw this on social media. Can I do this in my business? And I'm like, no, not unless you want to be in trouble for tax fraud. Like you can't do that.
Hey, I made 5 grand this month. Should I reincorporate my business in Costa Rica?
I'm an online fitness coach. Can I write off my Lamborghini that I never drive for business? No, no, you can't actually. You can buy it and maybe you can write off 1% when you drive to one client the whole year. But the other 99%, just so you know, is going to be a personal expense. And guess what? You still have to pay for the Lamborghini. It still comes out of your bank account. Just because you can write it off doesn't mean the money doesn't exist. It means you got a discount on the price. You still had to buy it.
When I think about write-offs, I think about and your wife comes home with something new, and she's like, "I saved $50 on
Yes.
this." It's like that's
Mhm.
great, but you still spent 500.
A that is the best way, and I say this all the time, it's a discount, it's not a gift card, right? I heard someone say that and I stole it, and I don't know who it was, so I can't give them credit, but it's a discount,
It's
not a
yours.
gift card, right? And so if you come yeah, I love that one. Like, if you come home and say, "I spent $500, but I got 50% off," it's like, you still spent $500. Like, we didn't need that. And so that was kinda what I was referring to earlier with the investing in the business is like,
Yeah.
if you just spend it to spend it, but you didn't need it and there was no return, like, cool, you just spent money. It doesn't matter. It was a write off.
And I'm going to say right off the bat, like it's okay to spend money on stuff that doesn't give you a return on investment.
If you
It's
know that
okay.
and you're
Yeah,
cool with that,
if
like
you're
if you're
intentional
intentional,
about it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. A lot of money comes back to being intentional, right? Because I have people who do things that are not optimal all the time. With money, it's not about being optimal. It's not about being the best spreadsheet example. It's about being intentional and knowing like, okay, here's the trade-offs. Like if I do X, I know that, Y and Z might happen, but I'm like cool with that, right? And then it's like, okay, cool. You are going into this aware of the situation. Now it's your money, do whatever you want. That's kind of how I actually view it a lot with my clients is like I'm there to tell you like what could happen, what could go wrong, and at the end of the day, I'm like, all right, Paul, like, but it's your money. Like, it's your life. You are like, you're the expert in your life. Like, you now know the whole situation. It's up to you. Like, what do you want to do? Like, oh, I want to go buy the truck. Cool, go buy the truck. Now you know you can only save 15%, instead of the 20% that you previously said you wanted to. But like, if you're cool with that, like I'm cool with that, right? At the end of the day, as long as you know that's the trade off, and you're cool with that, like, all right, cool, let's do that, right? It's your life. You got to live it.
Um, I asked this question to all the guests on the podcast. If you had a billboard on the side of the highway with a message on it for everyone to read, what would it say?
Build life or build wealth and live your best life.
I like it. I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes because I think your podcast is fantastic. If you do decide to continue it, I think it'll be a very valuable choice. But you're a great
If I
follower.
don't continue it, I've got something coming out that's more financial education based. Um, whether that's on a new channel or if I just kind of pivot the old Dollars and Dumbbells podcast into the new channel. I haven't fully decided how I'm rolling that out yet. But if you just find me on social media, you'll hear more about that. I got a baby coming soon, I was telling Paul. So I'm prepared for
Amazing.
that right now. But probably early July is when I plan on pushing out more of the finance based content for our generation and especially solopreneurs and entrepreneurs.
The last question I have for you is, if there was someone that you would like to see me interview on the podcast, who would it be? But the
Does it have
caveat
to?
is that you have to help me get them on.
Oh, I was just gonna say, does it have to be realistic? Um, oof, that's a good one. I have to help you get them on. I have no clue.
That's
I'm
okay.
trying to think. You put me
I'll
on
hit
the spot
I'll
here.
hit you up for it later.
Yeah, you put me on the spot here. I'm trying to think who would make the most sense that's in my network, would fit yours, and then I'm trying to think of that you haven't actually like talked to yet. Um,
Could be
do
someone
you
you've
know?
had on your podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, do you know Casey Joe Orvitas?
I don't know.
Okay, she's honestly, I had her on like episode 6, but I could definitely probably get her on. She's got like a mindset course for online health and fitness coaches, but I like before you get all like woo woo of mindset,
No, no,
she's
no.
got
I
a
like that
very
shit.
yeah, she's got a deep psychology background, which as someone who loves psychology of money, I loved her content. I almost took her course, like not even as a coach. Like I almost was like, dude, I'm gonna get in this. And I loved chatting with her because just she's got a really good background in psychology. She would be amazing, I think, for your audience. And I'm honestly, I wasn't gonna say her because I was like, I thought I was assuming that you probably already connected with her.
No,
Uh, but yeah, that would be my pick then.
sounds great, man. Listen, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely, I had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. And we'll catch you on the next one.